As we approach the prayers for our country and for Israel, I want to just take a moment to note one of the names that we have for Pesach, which is Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom. And that is one of the leitmotifs that we found in our Seder experience, literally and figuratively, as we talked about the process of redemption. And for some of us, maybe for all of us, this April, we hardly feel that pervasive sense of freedom. And as we gather, we're aware of how the entire human family is really not in a state of freedom. There are people fearing for their lives, worried about their safety, and with great sadness, we mourn the losses of innocent lives cut short in the last couple of weeks in Israel by terrorist attacks. Noteworthy that there were Jews killed, but also Christian Arabs, Jews, citizens of Israel, and as proud supporters of the state of Israel and the right of its citizens to live safely and without fear, we join Israelis and people everywhere in condemning these acts of terrorism. To see one in the New York City subway system just a couple of days ago reminds us that the world has a long way to go in terms of creating a safe and a place full of freedom for all of us. And then, of course, additionally, it is with great pain that we continue to watch. I feel, as I do, helpless to do anything as hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians sleep in bunkers, praying that they survive the night. And I think as we as Jews in particular have a deep understanding of what it means to have a powerful, violent leader to try to conquer and control another nation and bring about so much violence and destruction. And we hold the millions of Ukrainian refugees in our hearts and in our minds and try to support them. There are many ways we can do that as they travel through Europe, displaced, worried, and hungry in no way that we've seen since World War II. And so you may ask yourself, how can we celebrate a feast of freedom amidst all this suffering? And hopefully we can still find ways and glimmers of hope. The Seder holds out a vision, and I'll speak to this in a couple of minutes, for a world that is different than the one that we live in. And so we do what we can, and we bring about those sparks of hope that remind us that there is a different narrative, that our people's narrative of Exodus and redemption is the one that we can build upon. And hopefully that message is the one that can transform the world and bring us all to a greater place of peace. I invite us to rise as we're able on the middle of page 177. We join together in the English in the middle of the page for the prayer for our country. Our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer on behalf of our country and its government. Pour out your blessing upon this land, upon its inhabitants, upon its leaders, its judges, officers, and officials who faithfully devote themselves to the needs of the public. Help them understand the rules of justice you have decreed so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will never depart from our land. Adonai, God, whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the many peoples and faiths who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty from our land. May it be your will that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on earth, and may you cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me. And let us say, Amen. 178 together in the Hebrew. Avinu Shabashamayim, Tzur Yisrael v'go'alo, Barech et Medinat Yisrael, Reshit Tzmichat Gulatenu, Agen alea be'evrat chastecha, Ufros alea sukat shlomecha, Ushlach orcha ve'amilcha l'rashea, Sarea v'yoatzea, B'takdim be'etzah tova milfanecha, Chazek et yidei miginei eretz kodshenu, V'anchilem Elohini Yeshua, V'nateret nitzachon te'atrem, V'natata shalom ba'aretz, V'simchat olam liyoshvea, V'nomar Amen. May be seated as we turn ahead to the responsive chanting of the Ashrei on page 181. So great to be back in shul. This has been a little bit of a strange time for me as I've been, engaged in other projects and doing different things, teaching and doing some learning and writing and taking classes, all different things. But I really missed my shul, and I longed to be in community. It was great to be here a couple of weeks ago for the Glatzer Shabbat, and I did have the nice privilege of visiting other shuls, which is great. You learn some other things, and then you're like, oh, when am I coming home? So it's great to be back. It's nice to be back to a degree of normalcy as we're now in this newly renovated sanctuary, which the sound system works in a new, powerful way for the first time in 20 years. So I've got to adjust to that. But it's great, and it's great to have the ability for people who are at home to participate and to be seeing the service, and it's in a very subtle way, all of the cameras that are here, and so we're glad that all those at home can be included. And it feels a little bit more like Shabbat and Shul after, 27 months of being in a different kind of state. And I just want to say thank you to all those who've been involved in maintaining the shul, in creating this new, more inclusive space, and all the sacred work that we do here, from minyan to gabais to every part of leaving davening to making a minyan to being here this morning. It is an act of chesed to build community, especially in this kind of time that we've been going through. Now, all that said, it still feels weird. Last night felt especially weird because for the first time in 3 years, we actually had a Seder with real people sitting in chairs. I was thinking about the last few years. We had that first year, Pesach just kind of snuck up right on us, and it was a Zoom Seder with family up and down the East Coast, which was neat because normally we didn't have them all. And last year, it was just my mom, and it was we were in mourning, and just a few, her with the family, and a few on Zoom. Not the way it used to be. And last night we had a Seder with people. A lot of our students who are studying brought with their families, and people who have family out of town, and it was great. I have to say it wasn't perfect, and that I think was on me. I was a little rusty. It's always a balancing act. Keep it moving, time for discussion, keep everyone engaged, all the different ages. But, it was an old-time Seder. And I hope that however you celebrated in person, Zoom, hybrid, whatever it was, that you found meaning in our ancient traditions. So as you all know, the theme of the Seder is Geulah, is redemption. And it has both the redeeming of our people 3,500 years ago as a centerpiece, right? That is the telling of the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of the Exodus. But it's also hinting at the redemption that is yet to come. And that is a thread that it's woven throughout the Haggadah. In fact, it's throughout the Siddur. The Siddur goes back and forth, taking us back in time to the Exodus narrative, but also constantly pointing to a future redemption. I like to understand that as a time a little bit better than the one we're in now. I don't want to set the bar too high, but just a better time than it is now. And our ancestors understood that too. Whatever they were experiencing, for them, that period, a future time, a messianic time, was going to be better. Now, of course, we're familiar with the former message, which is dominant in the tradition. It's in the morning service, the evening service, right? Going back to Yetziat Mitzrayim, and that's the main objective of the Seder and the Haggadah, which, of course, Lahagid, to tell. We're telling the story. And you're supposed to tell it well, tell it creatively, tell it in a way that's engaging, that all these ages can understand and appreciate and remember. Although I was told by some of my family that my shtick is getting a little old. That was a little disappointing, but I'm working to get over it. We were told that we're not going to do the frog song, which we do often. But then luckily, a young participant in the Seder who's just 5 years old showed up, so we could do, went the little green frog. You don't all know it. Went the little green frog. And the other little frogs went, All right, well, it's really not the theme of my Dvar Torah, but you want to engage everyone in the Seder, and that's what it's all about. Telling the narrative with its rituals, questions, discussions, a great Jewish dinner party modeled on the Greek symposium. But of course, there's another element that's less obvious, and I want to come back to that future redemption. This was understood, again, to be the days of the Messiah, and I'm not as big a fan of a literal Messiah. Again, it's a more peaceful era. Now, the theme of this future redemption is in the Haggadah, but we might not see it at first, but it's there throughout. At the beginning of the Seder, the sages declare that the biblical injunction to tell the story of the Exodus, Kol Yemei Chayecha, all the days of your life, the sages interpret it as not just in this realm, but in a future realm, a future time of redemption. So they place it right there at the beginning of the Seder. And then after we tell the story 4 times, just to make sure you got it, after that, we drink the second cup of wine, and there's a special blessing of redemption. And it's unique, where we state that it's our hope to celebrate our future holidays in God's rebuilt city, Jerusalem, a classic feature of the Messianic age. It's a beautiful paragraph. If you missed it, look at it tonight. It's may we be able to enjoy future smachot together, right? And so all of us can feel that we want those moments in our lives. Now, there are other references embedded throughout the Haggadah, but I'll leave you with, of course, I think the best one, which is the final one. The Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. This can be understood literally, right? To be in Israel next year. And yes, by the way, we are planning a shul trip to Israel. We have been planning it for several times. As we like to say, 3rd time's a charm. So next February, please join us as we're going to Israel and to the UAE for extra fun. But the compilers of the Haggadah were not intending it simply to be the physical place, land of Israel, which of course they, unlike us, could not get on a plane and simply go to. They meant a different kind of Israel, right? Not merely the physical land, but also a different type, right? Jerusalem and Israel was for them a place in time, a spiritual state of mind, a future redemption. The Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim is about this mystical sense that things can get better. And when we sing it, we're dancing with hope, right? We are thinking of a time of peace and blessing. But there's one more place in the Seder that I wanted to point out that you may not have thought about. It's when we take the first bite of matzah. And last night was very special. Many people have the custom of not eating matzah for 30 days before. My wife has the custom of not eating it the entire year before, which I point to her. But in the song it says, Ma nishtana, that we eat matzah, all year long. Anyway, that's fine. So when we eat the matzah the first night, and again, tonight we'll do it, we recite how many blessings? 2. So the first one is motzi, because it's bread. And the second one is achilat matzah. This is a special eating of matzah, its own unique mitzvah for this holiday of the matzot, Chag HaMatzot. Now, the motzi is what I want to discuss, which of course is for all bread, and I don't mean to get you all involved in a whole bread time because we're just getting over bread. I had a baguette until like 10:30 yesterday morning. I was like trying to milk every last minute of that delicious baguette. Now, what's the blessing that we say over bread? This is an easy one. Okay, good. Now translate it for me. Who brings forth bread, right? Any kind of bread, we say this blessing. It could be pita, lafa, right? It could be matzah. I bought some Passover flour, so I'm going to make my own matzah, soft matzah on Pesach. A little risky. Got to keep my eye on the clock and not go over that 18 minutes, but I'm excited. Now, right, we translated, bring forth bread from the earth. Now, what does this mean exactly? What are we saying in this blessing? Right, we're thanking God for the grain, but we don't say that. Right? It's strange. And by the way, just remember, we're not blessing the bread. I often hear this kind of a little bit misconstrued, right? We're not blessing the bread. We are being thankful, right, for God that we have the bread. But of course, God doesn't bring forth bread. This is a uniquely human activity. If we want to see God in it, we could think of God at the beginning of the journey. God is in the wheat, the earth, nature, creation, sets up this process. But we're the ones who transform it into bread or matzah. Think about other blessings. Normally the blessing is straightforward. Wine, grape juice, borei pri hagafen, right? Fruit of the vine. What'd you say last night over the karpas? Borei pri adama, right? The fruit of the earth. The blessing connects exactly to what it is in nature. But that's not the case of the bread. Here, we don't go back to the original source. So what's the deeper message of this blessing? Rabbi Lawrence Hoffman, in the great series, in his book, The Way into Jewish Prayer, points us to a midrash in Genesis, 5th century rabbinic commentary in this midrash. The Torah states that while Adam and Eve cannot eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which was in the middle of the Garden of Eden, the Torah doesn't indicate what all the other trees were, because apparently there were lots of trees. This Rabbi Zera, comes along, very creative thinker, and he says that there were these bread trees, that they would grow loaves of bread, and you could pick them off. I don't know if they needed salt, but whatever, you would just go to the bread tree and have bread. What? Pumpernickel, rye, whatever you wanted. For people allergic, you got spelt and oat bread, whatever it was all there. And he says that these bread trees were as big as the cedars of Lebanon. So they apparently had just large quantities. He gives a proof text. He says, since after the expulsion from the Garden of Eden, the Torah states, you shall only eat bread by the sweat of your brow, meaning you'll no longer have the bread trees. Now you're going to have to make it. But there's a little bit more that happens in the midrash after this. They then debate, right, what is the import of this blessing? Is it referring to the bread right in front of us, which is what you would think, right, because that's what's in front of you? Or is it talking about something like a future bread? And one rabbi says, well, of course, it's the bread in front of you. But Chazal, the sages, overrule this and say, when you look at bread, it's not about the bread in front of you. It's about some kind of future redemption. They look at the bread in the larger context of human history. This is a bread that will grow in time to a redemption bread. Not this Edenic Garden of Eden, right, time of perfection, looking back on it. not the current moment with all of its complexities, but every time you eat bread, it's looking to the future, a future of hope and redemption, a future where all people will have bread to eat. It directs us to a time where we'll all be sustained by food, and all of that, of course, brings us right back to the Seder. What do we say at the beginning of the Seder when we uncover the matzot? Halachma anya. Right? This is the bread of affliction, and then we invite anyone who's hungry to come into our homes. This matzah is a call to action. This bread is in essence a command to feed others. And then what does it say in the Aramaic? Hashata hacha. This year we are here. We're stuck in this imperfect world with all of its messes. But l'shana haba'ah, next year be'arad Israel. Next year we'll be in the land of Israel. Next year we're going to be in a better place. When we feed others, when we look at the matzah of the Seder, or any bread at any time, reciting the motzi, the tradition invites us to think about our duties to help others, to feed others, to care for them. And when we do that, we actually bring the world closer to Geulah, to redemption. So tonight at the second Seder, I will invite you to enjoy another serving of matzah. At the same time, think about the hope that we will be next year in the land of Israel, whether physically or spiritually, in a world of peace and redemption. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.